Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This is the June 2023 Power BI for Enviro's virtual meetup. For those people that are new, this is the sort of mission we set out to create almost 2 years ago when we started this. So idea is to share new case studies across the environment and the water industry, learn new tips and tricks and share those ideas and just empower Enviros and just people in general working with Power BI on their journey. A little bit of housekeeping just in general. So if you have the Teams app, we suggest using that. Just as a courtesy to the speakers, just mute yourself when not speaking. Feel free to type questions in the chat. We've got a few people that'll be able to moderate and might be able to respond. Otherwise, there will be an opportunity for you to show your video, turn your microphone on and ask your question directly of the speakers if you want. As a reminder, we're recording this session. It'll be available on the DiscoverEI YouTube channel and also just shared through the meetup group and just a small Teams tip there. Alice and I actually dialing in. It's the first time we're actually presenting the Power BI for Enviro's meetup from our new home in North Fremantle over in the west coast of Australia. So we just like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional owners of the Greater Fremantle and Walyallup area, where we are dialing in from, and pay our respects to their elders past and present, and also just acknowledge the traditional owners from the lands that you're dialing in from, whether that is from within Australia or across the world. So appreciate everyone dialing in. Event sponsors just that supporting the meetups. That's Alice and myself at DiscoverEI. This is just some of the sort of work we work in and sort of services that we offer, largely in the environment and the water space. But today's session, which is why everyone is dialed in and very excited for, we're talking about the tool that was created for Southeast Water, which is one of the larger water corporations within Victoria in Australia, and how Power BI has been used here as an environmental sensitivity mapping tool. So it was used to help, it was created to be able to help Southeast Water identify some of their key sensitivities across their region of both environmental and public health, and a decision-making tool to help then inform both risk assessments and incident response to sort of areas of concern that need to be highlighted. So we're very lucky to have Petter from Alluvium to discuss the context around the study, the process that the team took to develop the initial Power BI dashboard, and then Alice from DiscoverEI, she'll come in and share some of the Power BI refinement processes and the requirements from the team for updating the report. In relation to today's speakers, there is information on the meetup invite about the speakers that we have today, but just to summarize it, so Dr. Peter Nyman is a hydrologist with more than 20 years research and consulting experience. Peter works across a diverse range of projects at the Alluvium Group, delivering work in strategic planning, data analytics, and in the development of tools that help bring science and evidence into the decision-making process. And I think with your presentation today, Petter, you'll sort of cover all those different elements in relation to your previous experiences and this particular project. Alice Drummond, sitting next to me, is a co-founder of DiscoverEI. She's a Microsoft Data Platform MVP and specializes in Power BI for the water and environmental industries. That's as much as we sort of wanted to cover off on in relation to the introduction for today's session. So Petter, I'll stop sharing, mate, and you're more than welcome to share your screen and get into it.
Thanks, Christian. I am sharing now, and maybe just give me a thumbs up if that's working okay.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm representing Alluvium here today, and this work that we're presenting is very much a collaborative effort amongst some of the other companies that sit in our group, and Ying Kwek from EcoFutures has been very instrumental in doing a lot of the data analysis and data wrangling that sits behind the dashboard that we'll be presenting today. My part of the presentation here is really about the process that we went through to actually arrive at a mapping tool that would enable Southeast Water to make informed decisions regarding some of their operational and strategic aspects of what they do in their domain of the Melbourne metropolitan region. And it's quite a process. And initially it was this idea when we started off the project that we need a mapping tool and some way of visualizing spatial data related to environmental sensitivity. And the context behind that is a need to understand the type, the location, and the level of significance of environmental values within the operating boundaries for Southeast Water. And so this is to help inform decisions around operations, sewage spills, constructions, various elements of what Southeast Water are doing within their spatial domain, and what are the potential impacts in relation to those operations, and how can they best respond and plan during incidents. So it's both that strategic element around planning, but also being efficient to address potential consequences in the event of a spill. So having information at your fingertips is sort of one of the key sort of design criteria here, and that want to move away from having to siphon through endless amounts of databases that are located on different or hosted at different places on the web or within your own internal database, and try and consolidate that into one home where you can quickly access that information and also access it with sufficient amount of details to make informed decisions, and also having that information accessible across different parts of the business where you have different, I guess, levels of expertise in terms of dealing with spatial data. And so from someone who has never opened up a GIS project through to someone who has quite a lot of experience with GIS, for this tool to actually cater for quite a diverse range of groups. And really the aim here through the project was to first review data sources to understand what sort of information can we generate from these data sources. So how can we take this data and turn it into information that Southeast Water can act on? And on the basis of that, there's a lot of data sets, but only some qualified to actually be brought into the mapping tool. There's some data sources that are too outdated, or they don't have enough information behind them, or they don't really serve a need in terms of informing Southeast Water on the management decisions. And so we went from this sort of long list to a short list of data sets that we wanted to bring in. And then finally was this idea that we wanted to actually turn this into a tool. And initially it was agnostic to whether or not it was going to be Power BI or something else, but through our engagement with Southeast Water, Power BI, was deemed as the most suitable platform for bringing all these data sources together because of a variety of reasons. And I think this tool development process is quite a critical part it forms a critical part of arriving at a successful outcome, and it starts with really understanding, why are we actually developing this, so that sort of scoping phase and trying to understand how we can align technology with the needs, understand the data, and we achieve this through stakeholder workshops with Southeast Water and having also technical experts in the room that are familiar with some of the environmental values that sit across, the marine, estuarine, and terrestrial and waterways within Southeast Water domain. And then it's this, actually developing up the sensitivity framework, because the different ways of thinking about environmental sensitivity and aligning that with the data that we have available to us. And then into the more sort of techie space around, how can we build a data architecture that is aligned with the design criteria that we specified for the dashboard. And again, there's a fair bit of to and fro with Southeast Water here through workshopping and meetings and things like that. And then finally, once all that stuff is in place, there is the sort of geoprocessing and data wrangling and implementation of the actual database into the dashboard and the report. And we got some way along the way on that, but Alice and her team have refined that and developed a dashboard into what you will see later on in her presentation. Understanding the need. So the sort of questions that really sort of came up through that process is, first, what sort of decisions will be made? And this is really important to understand, how are you actually going to act on the information that's presented to you, and how can we get the balance right between, the way this information will inform strategic decision-making process versus operational needs in the event of a incident or a spill. Who are the users? There's a whole range of people working within these organizations. There's engineers, there's environmental planners, there's scientists, policy people. And so how can we cater for those different needs across that user group? Software and data management systems. And so what sort of requirements and specifications that imply for sort of product that we deliver? Existing in-house capabilities. So how familiar are they with GIS and databases and coding? In a different setting, it might be that you build up a Python or an R workflow that would serve as a mapping tool. But in this case, that was not the solution. How are they looking to actually maintain the tool and the data inputs to ensure that it's up to date? So these are some of the questions that we had to unpack in that early stage of scoping out needs. Then we sort of came to actually defining the sensitivity framework, and through the data review and reviewing some of the literature around sensitivity, we came up with this framework around irreplaceability and vulnerability making up our sensitivity, where the irreplaceability is about how rare is your asset. And so to what extent would the loss of an area of species compromise the regional conservation targets for that species? And so it's about the rarity, and it has quite a high weighting in the sensitivity matrix that you look at, that we'll see in the next slide. The vulnerability is more about, for a particular species or an area or a habitat, how sensitive is it to the process that it might be exposed to, whether it's a spill or some other disturbance event. How vulnerable is this species to that? And so those two components of sensitivity, that's how we approach it. And so for the different environmental values that we assessed, we looked to define or rank them according to their irreplaceability and vulnerability, going from very low to very high, so a score of 1 to 5, and put some definitions around this. And this is a subjective process in some cases. In other cases, the data set is very strongly aligned with these concepts, but in other cases, we have to go through like a expert elicitation process and arrive at these scoring system through expert input. Now, how does this come together into a sensitivity rating? Well, we put up a matrix of vulnerability and irreplaceability, where the combination of the two make up the sensitivity score. So if your irreplaceability is 1, your sensitivity is always going to be 1. If your irreplaceability is 5, it's always going to be 5. And then in between, you have this, different combinations of irreplaceability and vulnerability making up different sensitivity scores. Now, initially, we start off with 87 data sets that was related to environmental values. And through an initial screening of the sensitivities of the data sets, and also the screening of the quality of the data sets and their currency and the frequency of update, we sort of went from a list of 87 through to a short list of 33, and those are the ones that are now embedded within the data dashboard. And we source these data from various databases, both national and Victorian, and more sort of specialized databases within water utilities or coastal and marine research organizations. We categorized all these data sets into 4 themes. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, lots of different data sets, and one of the sort of key steps in taking those data and turning them into information is to try and make it easy to access that data. And one way is this initial high-level partitioning of our data sets into themes. And so we ended up with the waterway theme, the terrestrial ecological theme, the marine theme, and the terrestrial non-ecological theme. And I'm calling them grids here, and we'll get back to that later, but this is sort of a key step in trying to build up a database and a structure that would enable you to have the level of interaction with the sensitivity mapping tool that Southeast Water needed in terms of being able to select areas and then look at what's actually contained with those areas. And so within each of these themes, we ended up with a whole set of data sets. And I won't go into too much detail there, but that's what sits behind the dashboard that you will see later. These are the definitions of the themes. So for some, it's not that straightforward. So for example, with waterways, you have birds that are quite tightly coupled to wetlands. And so do values related to birds, do they exist in the waterway theme, or do we bring them into the terrestrial theme? So it's a bit of sort of decision making around what belongs where. And obviously with marine and waterways, you have the estuary theme, which we haven't considered here, but we might be looking to introduce that into the dashboard sometime soon. In terms of actually taking these data sets and translating them into a data set that can go into the dashboard, the first step is for us was to bring the shortlist data into GIS and apply rules to assign sensitivity scores on the basis of what has been mapped. So it could be EVC, which is your vegetation type. So on the basis of the vegetation type, what is your sensitivity score? So if it's a threatened grassland, you're going to have a high sensitivity score. If it's a particular forest, there's a lot of it and is not particularly vulnerable, then it gets a low sensitivity score. So we end up with these maps, many of them just vector files, some of them raster files, with just shapes, polygons, or raster cells that have a sensitivity score assigned to them. Now, we brought those into our different value templates, so our marine values, our terrestrial values, etc. And then we went through a way to sort of assign these sensitivity and vulnerability scores based on the distributions. And so for some of our data sets, we didn't have a direct mechanisms for linking the data values into a score. And so we had to look at the distribution of values across our domain. And so we had this way of ranking them by plotting the distributions. And so this is sort of a workflow that we coded into Python. And so through this whole workflow, we end up with, at the end of it, these grids that have sensitivity score assigned to them for all of the different data sets that we've started off with. And these are then what's being brought into the actual dashboard. Now, while we're working on this data processing component and understanding how we can take the data and translating it into information that you can act on and make management decisions on, we're also working with Southeast Water to understand what are the requirements in terms of the design of the dashboards. And so what is a useful way to summarize the data? What are key bits of information? It's a bit of a typo here. And then for us to propose some suitable graphics and designs and layouts and some sketches. And so we did this in terms of wireframes and just a bit of back and forth with Southeast Water and around what works, what doesn't work. And we did that through just PowerPoint. So we just sketched up some dashboard sketches in PowerPoint and we shared those and worked through those with Southeast Water. And then finally, you know, really starting to refine and actually build the dashboard itself and a series of you know, review steps on the actual dashboard once it's been built into Power BI. You know, and I think it's really important to be really systematic and around how that process unfolds. So the reviews, you know, how you incorporate feedback and being really, mindful about how you're actually going to progress through that. So there's enough opportunity and time for, in this case, Southeast Water to provide feedback and enough opportunity for us to tweak and work with the different parameters that we're exploring. So really having a clear sort of timeline and steps and an engagement plan for how that process unfolds. So once we understood exactly what we wanted, we went into the geoprocessing and the wrangling. And again, I sort of touched on this before, but I guess one of the key steps here was, as we were working through this sensitivity scoring, sometimes the way in which we thought about irreplaceability and vulnerability translated into an output that didn't give enough resolution in our sensitivity scoring for it to add value to Southeast water. For example, for some data sets, everything became red. It was all really, really sensitive, and you go like, well, how do we act on this? We don't have any grain here to actually say what's more important. Is this area more important than that area? And so it's a bit of a loop here to actually look at what's our rules in our sensitivity rating table and bringing that back in and then reprocessing that data, checking in with Southeast water around, okay, does this distribution of sensitivity work for you? Because in some respects, it's the relative values that are more important than the absolutes, because when you understand the relative values, that's when you have a basis for prioritization. And so it's a few kind of loops around here. And again, that's where that sort of planning and the engagement becomes really important, to actually have that loop built into how you want to deliver the work. And then once we've settled on how we wanted to actually do the sensitivity mapping, we built the grids, and then the associated sort of ecological asset database that's linked to the grids. And these are then what goes into the dashboard. And sort of on this little package of, I guess, data sits in here, which is quite a sort of key feature of the dashboard, is that we do have these grids or spatial templates. Within each grid has a cell ID, and that cell ID is cross-referenced with two databases. One is a sensitivity score that we have applied on the basis of the data sets that were in the shortlist. And the other one is a sort of cross-referenced ecological asset database, which is not the sensitivity score, but all the ecological information that intersects with that grid. So for species observations, it might be a list of all the birds that have been observed within that grid. And that's what has informed our sensitivity score, but it provides a opportunity to use the dashboard to both quickly see, okay, what's the sensitivity, but also why is it sensitive? And that's where this sort of double cross-referencing becomes really important. And it also allows you to look at, what are other ecological assets, a particular wetland, is it a Ramsar wetland? Is it a particular point of interest, like a marine national park or a beach that's important for swimming? Whatever it is, having this sort of dual database linked to this grid ID, that's sort of a critical component of the underlying data structure of the dashboard. And so the way it looks in the dashboard is that you have the grids sitting as a sort of a mapping component here, and we implement that using Mapbox. And if you select some components of this grid using the lasso tool, you then get you link to that kind of ecological asset database, which then lists what is the sensitivity, but also what are the ecological assets that sit within those grid cells. The themes sit at the top, and then all the different data sets that fall within each theme sit down the left-hand side. So this was our first crack at building the dashboard, and then through Alice and her team, it's gone through a few sort of iterations to make it more user-friendly and more aligned with exactly what Southeast Water wanted in terms of the visualization and the functionality. And I guess another key advantage with Power BI and these types of products is that instead of producing a long PDF report with all the theory and all the logic behind the framework, we can actually publish it onto the dashboard itself, so that there's easy access to all that information that underpins the dashboard. So if you are using it, you can also access the information around what does this information, what does this dashboard actually, what is it telling me, and how was it built? So that's it for me, Christian.
Thanks, Tata. That was a really, really good overview of the process of collating the data from the initial kind of conception, thinking about sketching it through the iterative nature, all the way through to the dashboard development. So thank you so much for presenting. I'm sure everyone has lots of questions. We might save Q&A just until the end of the presentation, then we can answer them together at the end. So I'll just start sharing my screen now. Just bear with me one moment. I'll bring it up. Cool. So I'm sharing my screen. Everyone can see that okay? Oh, good, I hope. Perfect. So thanks so much, Petter. What I'm going to run through now.
Alice.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, it doesn't seem to be sharing at my end. Petter, can you see
Okay.
it?
Yes.
No,
sorry,
it came up initially and then it went away.
Okay.
Maybe
Yep.
try
Perfect.
again.
Thank you. I'm going to try again. Sorry, we're having problems with my Teams this morning. I'm on the Teams browser.
We got it now. It's there now,
Oh,
Alice.
perfect. Awesome. Cool. So what I'm going to chat through today is having a look at the key refinements to the initial Power BI dashboard report and the opportunities to enhance the user experience. So Christian and I came into the study towards the end when the initial dashboard had been created. And Southeast Water just wanted to enhance and elevate the user experience. So I'm going to chat through a couple of the key updates that we made to the dashboard, including branding, navigation, searchability, thinking about the actionability of the data, and also the opportunity to include instructions in the dashboard, just really to help enhance the user's experience on how to navigate through this tool, because as we know, Power BI could sometimes be a bit of a foreign tool. And as Petter mentioned, this tool really wanted to reach a lot of different audiences, from people using it in a highly technical sense, all the way through to very kind of non-technical users as well. So I'm going to touch on the first point here, having a look at how we updated the report to align with Southeast Water's corporate brand and style guide to really try to focus on promoting that familiarity in the data, which also brings with it a bit more trust in the tool itself. So I'll just jump into the existing dashboard that Petter and the team created. As you can see here, this is an example of one of the themes of the dashboard. If we click onto the terrestrial theme, you can see that we've got lots of different sub-themes here as well. And the overall kind of branding and look and feel of the dashboard, it's got lots of it's using like a grayscale color palette, which is a really nice neutral tone. It does have the primary blues of Southeast Water, but it just didn't really align with the brand and styles guide. So the first place that we usually go to, if we haven't got a brand and styles guide just yet, and we're thinking, oh, we're creating a dashboard for a client, is heading across to their website and having a look at how they kind of present their brand there. So we can see that there's a lot of white space on their website, using minor kind of gray tones here for navigation. We do have that primary royal blue color. That stands out. They've also got this interesting wave graphic that they've used in a couple of images as well. So what we did was we consulted with the brand and content team, got the brand and styles guide, and really tried to bring that through into the dashboard to help to elevate and align it with the styles. So you can see that we're trying to promote the white space here, just like on the website. We've got the logo, we're using that interesting wave feature here, but we also have those kind of gray tones as well. So that was one of the first initial refinements that we looked at, just to really align it with the Southeast Waters brand. The second one that I will touch on now is thinking about how users navigate through the report and just making a couple of minor tweaks to really enhance the report navigation experience. So if we have a look at the existing dashboard, Petter mentioned that there were 4 key themes to explore across the dashboard. So the terrestrial, waterway, marine, and terrestrial non-ecological. And users can navigate between the different themes using the buttons and bookmarks. And then within each theme, we've got lots of different sub-themes. There's a lot of data which is presented in the dashboard, and a lot of data to explore, which is really good, but sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming to users, and you can get a little bit lost in the details and not sure exactly where we are. So the users were relying on having to read the titles just to understand where they are in the dashboard. So with our updates, what we focused on was trying to improve that navigation experience to make it a little bit more obvious and explicit where the users were in the dashboard, just to help them not get too lost, especially if they're exploring it for the first time. So you can see that we've got the themes here, but we've shifted them across to the left-hand panel, and people can navigate through the different themes by clicking on the buttons. So we're still using the same button and bookmark technique, but this time, instead of having the words, we've made a minor tweak, just using icons as a default state to try to take away some of the text on the dashboard, because it does take a lot of your cognitive load to read a lot of different text. You can see when you select a different theme, that same icon is up in the header, and we've got the header quite bold, so it's a little bit more obvious around where we are in the dashboard. And then within each theme, you can navigate to the different sub-themes along the top panel. So you can see that when you've selected a sub-theme, the state is selected. So we've got a different color. We're using the royal primary blue here to show what has been selected. And the way we're doing this is using the Power BI Bookmark Navigator. So this was a relatively new visual. I can't remember when it came out now, but it came out for us just in time for this study. So that's one thing to note when you're working on Power BI studies. Power BI does get updated every month. And I think Peter and the Alluvium team started the study, and they worked on it over a period of time. And during that time, there weren't all these features available within Power BI. So once you get to the end of a Power BI project, just have a think about, oh, has there been any new features which have been updated, which I could go back and enhance the report with? So previously, the team did have to quite painfully configure lots of individual buttons and bookmarks, which if we're trying to store the selected state in the old method, it would be very challenging and quite complex to have duplicate bookmarks over the top of each other. If anyone's worked with this in the old way, you understand the pain. But now they've got the bookmark, we've used the Bookmark Navigator, so it makes it really easy. This is just one visual here. So that was the second key refinement. The third one, this was probably the biggest structural change that we made to the dashboard, was all about finding ways to try to enhance the searchability of the dashboard. So if we go to the existing tool, and I'll chat through how the team wanted to navigate this tool. So we've got the maps, the sensitivity maps. These are the key hero visual on each page. This contains a lot of the information. And then all of the supporting information is around the side in tables and charts. But really, the key information from the map are the sensitivity scores. So users really liked the ability to go into the map. So this is a Mapbox map visual, and search for a particular address. So the address could be a location of a project or an incident or a spill. And then they wanted the ability to lasso select the area of interest around that site. So whether it's like a 5K, 10K radius around the site, that was the area that they wanted to investigate. And we can see in the existing tool that this does work pretty well. We select the area, and that data is filtered on the right-hand side. But one of the downsides of this approach is you can see that when we've selected the area, because we're using the Mapbox visual, that stores the selected state as a color. So it's overriding the nice conditional formatting that was applied to show the key information, which is a sensitivity score. But also, if you navigate to another sub-theme or theme within the dashboard, then the users have to repeat that process because, as we know with selections from visuals, they're kind of not sticky. They just select until you deselect an area or until you make another selection. So it doesn't fix it between each screen. So this was one of the biggest user experience components that the team wanted me to investigate to see if we could enhance it. So there were two key options available to us, which we investigated. The first one, if you're a Power BI user, might be quite obvious, thinking about, could we use slicers? So if you've worked in Power BI before, you know that slicers, they act almost like a filter, and they lock the selection. So they work really well. They would allow us to select it based on maybe a postcode or a suburb or a catchment, and it would filter those cells. And we can sync slices across report pages. So that would work quite nicely. The challenge was that this data doesn't naturally get broken down into specific discrete groups. So doing filter selections on a catchment or a subcatchment or a postcode doesn't work across all the data sets. There's no unified way of slicing this data. But also, they really wanted the ability to select from the map itself because all the project locations or incidents are different, and maybe we want to select a very specific area. So that led us to investigate our second option, which was report drill through. And this is actually what we went with. So I'll show you how it works. So on the home page of the dashboard, we've got the master grid. This was the grid that Peter referred to, which covers the entire study area. And you can type in an address and select an area from the map. And this selects the cells. This is still the same Mapbox map. And to get into the main dashboard now, then we can right click and we can drill into the dashboard itself. So what this does is, because we're applying drill through, we're keeping all the filters from that first page and we're applying it to this dashboard page. So you can see that we've got all of those grid cells that we'd selected. They're filtered by the drill through. On this page, we've got a little subset map to show what area has been selected. And we can see that that area has been selected here, and it's consistent across all of the themes and all the different sub-themes as well. So it locks that area that we've selected. You can also go and select a new area on top of this using the lasso tools if you want. And on pages, we have different slices to further filter the data. So there's a few different ways that we've got that extra filters and searchability of the data in there. But this might sound really good, but one kind of big limitation that we did discuss with the team quite a lot of this approach is with drill through, we're drilling into one page, which meant that all of these visuals are configured on the same Power BI report page. So I think I haven't counted, but this could result in 200, maybe 300 visuals all on the one page. And anyone who's worked with Power BI before knows that that is a really interesting way of configuring a report. It's something you wouldn't typically do. It does create a little bit of complexity when it comes to updating and maintaining the tool. But I think this was a really big usability feature that the team wanted to include in the tool, so they decided that, yeah, it was worth the compromise. So what we did was just be very logical and thoughtful with how we named different visuals and how we grouped different visuals. So you can see within Power BI, we can group common visuals together. And we've grouped all of the common visuals into their different report themes, which aligns with these buttons down the left-hand side. And you can see I'm using this star Unicode icon to represent that that is a theme. We have some extra common visuals and navigation pane down the bottom. And within each theme, we have some common visuals here with like the header. But then we have these different sub-themes that we've grouped, and using a different Unicode icon here to show that this is a sub-theme. So that's how we've configured it. I wouldn't typically recommend this approach, but I think for this study, it was the solution that worked the best to meet those kind of user requirements. The fourth one, which I'll focus on today, is thinking about ways to increase the actionability of the data. So Peter mentioned that one of the key components of this study was collecting and presenting a lot of different environmental sensitivity information to help all members of the team act on the data. That was a key criteria. So we were lucky coming at this study with almost like a fresh set of eyes. We were looking at ways to help users understand, so first understand what information is being presented, to then help them act on the data. So we did this in a couple of ways. One of them was on every sub-theme page, we included a new section saying, what does this data mean? Where we tried to write in plain English what the data presented actually represents. So trying to remove some of the scientific terminology there, as well as including click-through links on some of the data sets to get more information. So you can see here we're using just a normal Power BI text box for this. And the information is literally just written into these text boxes because we wanted to include different formatting options and click-through links. So it was a very simple solution, but what it meant was that non-technical users and scientists could get that context around what this data means. There were options to download the spatial data set, options to export the data to Excel or CSV files so people could review and kind of analyze the data. And also ways of making the key data points stand out. So using conditional formatting in some of the tables to highlight the sensitivity scores. On one of the new pages that the team configured together as part of our involvement in the study, the strong focus was on how to act on this data. So the incidents page is really where I think the team would go to if there had been a spill or an incident occur in that area. And they're only after a very a specific subset of information for each of the themes. So you can see that we're presenting the data here, but also including an incident response. So telling the team if the score is 3 above, then could contact an environmental specialist for a remediation response and sampling requirements. So it's saying, it's telling the team how to act on the information as well. So just think about that if you're working on Power BI studies. Don't underestimate just including plain old text boxes with plain English text and thinking about not only the data presented, but including prompts to help people act on the data. And the last thing I'll touch on all around the user experience was including instructions in the Power BI report to help especially new users navigate and get the most out of the tool. So as part of this study, we recorded a very short kind of how-to demo video, which we've embedded inside the tool to show users how to navigate through the tool and the different Power BI features to look out for. So this is a very simple technique. We've embedded it in the Power BI report using the HTML content visual, which is Daniel Marsh-Patrick's amazing visual. We only ever use it for videos, but it works really well for our videos. So that means that the new users kind of have a bit more instructions into how to navigate through the tool. So as part of the study, we focused not on changing any of the structure or the architecture of the data. It was really about enhancing the look and feel and the usability of the dashboard, which the team had created. They'd done an amazing job, really good start point. We just made a few minor tweaks, really focused on the aesthetics and usability. So they were the key points that I wanted to touch on. So I think now would be a really good time for any Q&A. If people had any questions about any of the techniques in the dashboard, or any questions about the data wrangling and thought behind that, please, now's the opportunity, come off mute or ask your questions in the chat as well. I see we've got a question from Heather Lacey. Feel free to go off mute.
Awesome, thanks. Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Peter. That was a really good presentation. So I had a question about how all the data was coming together. I'm assuming with the, I guess, the water quality data that was coming from utilities, does that mean that the dashboard is linked to the APIs of the databases?
No. So at the moment, we've built it based on a geoprocessing workflows that sits separate to the actual dashboard itself. So if you want to update data behind the dashboard, there's a separate process to that, where initially we did a lot of the kind of geoprocessing. We started off with a bit of iterative process. We start off with a sort of manual GIS workflow, but we're in the process of automating a lot of that. And some of the data sets you can link to APIs and have it automated, but the process for then integrating that with the dashboard is still a manual one. But there's no reason why you couldn't have the database behind the dashboard be linked to those automatic geoprocessing workflows and have that happening, without much supervision. I mean, there's opportunities there, but a lot of the data sets that we used are not available through APIs. So it has to involve some sort of manual, updating. So for some data sets, we're updating every 4 months, I think, for some of the sort of threatened species lists, which keep updating pretty frequently. Others, it's like an annual update.
Okay, excellent. You actually answered my second question there as well, which was the data update frequency. So thanks, Peter. Thanks, Alice.
Thanks a lot, Heather. That was a really good question. We've got a question from Mika in the chat. What GIS program are you using for that workflow?
Initially, we worked in QGIS. Now we're coding it up in ArcGIS Pro and using Python and building sort of automatic geoprocessing workflows using Python.
Yeah, awesome. And the mapping visual in Power BI was Mapbox as well. Oh yeah, good question. Were there any other questions from the audience or in the chat?
Yes, I do have a question. Well, I was just wondering, actually, could you clarify the terminology? Like, what is considered? How can you explain what a dashboard is in comparison to just, an average report?
Yeah, so this is where terminology in Power BI speak gets a little bit confusing. I think we, both myself and Peter, use dashboard and report interchangeably. So really, I think a dashboard is just a presentation of the key data sets and key results, which people can take away to make decisions. In a Power BI terminology sense, a dashboard is something completely different. It sits on the Power BI online service and is a link to key tiles, which could be across multiple reports. They're not interactive, and you click on it and it launches the report. Yeah, sorry, I do use those words interchangeably. I think most people in the environmental industry who maybe not too familiar with Power BI call everything a report. So I've adopted that as well. Did that help out for your question?
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries at all. I see we've got another hand raised from Nav.
Oh yeah, cool. Thanks, Elias and Peter. My question is on the whoever watching those or browsing through those Power BI reports, do they know that the data is not live? Basically, we are not calling the live APIs, right? So we are taking the database backup on which we are building all these different Power BI reports. My question is, on that same point, are we updating the users that whatever the reports that they're watching now or viewing at that point of time is not live data? It is something that we have taken the backup and running these queries on that one.
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the Power BI dashboard itself, we've got a footer which includes the date the data was last refreshed. So it is included in the report. It's not very kind of big or obvious or in bold. So maybe that could be feedback from the users if it was unclear. Maybe that could be a little bit more obvious in the Power BI report down the track, how often the data was updated or when it was last refreshed. But yeah, that's a really good point.
Oh, I got it. So you mean that they have to know the fact that when they initially viewing those reports, they are not on the live, and at the same time, what I understand from your talk was they have to run those updates to get the latest data before regenerating those reports on the screen.
Yeah, so I think Petter said that they would update the tool periodically every 4 months or so, and then the dashboard would stay the same for the 4 months, the data presented. And there is text in the dashboard to say what or when it was last updated. Yeah, so hopefully that would be obvious to the users there.
Cool, thanks, Mike.
Awesome. We've got a couple more questions coming through in the chat. We got a question from Peter. If you're looking for a tool to help capture geotag data out in the field, then MapTasker for Power Apps can be used. This can be also directly integrated with ArcGIS Online or Esri Enterprise on-prem. So it's a good complementary solution to this amazing dashboard. Oh, thanks so much for that, Peter. A little bit of extra advice. No, it sounds really cool. I've heard of MapTasker. I haven't used it before, but yeah, as we know, Power Apps and Power BI, they go really well together. There's another question here from Tom. How long does it take to retrieve the data? Is it being hosted on a cloud service, and how are you ensuring its efficiency, and where is it hosted?
There's the initial data harvesting and the processing before it's brought in to the report. That can be a bit of a time-consuming thing, like some of these data sets are buried and there's a fair bit of processing involved in wrangling it into the format that it needs to be for and the scoring that we apply. But the more we code it up, the more efficient that process becomes. Some of that is stored, on Victorian data services or national data services. In terms of the actual data sets that sit behind the dashboard and how the actual report, how that interacts with the database, that's just hosted locally, I think. Alice, you're probably better off speaking to that.
Yeah, so it's hosted on, because of key visual is Mapbox, it's hosted in Mapbox Online. So it renders really fast in the dashboard because the team have used grids. So there's not too much, I think there's like, I don't know, 8,000 grid cells across the area. So it doesn't put any load on Power BI. It renders really fast. There could be less actually. But yeah, so it's hosted, once it's been updated, those grids, the grid is hosted in Mapbox Online, but then it's getting the color, the environmental sensitivity rating from the data in the dashboard. Hopefully that answers the question. We have another question from James. Is there a system in place for storing the history of the grids for retrospective analysis and change over time?
No, but we should. It's a good point. Yeah, that would be a very interesting potential application of these analysis that we do. So you can track sensitivity over time in response to changing land use and changing environmental profiles across this area. So good idea.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Sandeep asked a question: what was the reason behind moving to ArcGIS Pro from QGIS?
The environment for coding up geospatial workflows in ArcGIS Pro it's just neater and cleaner. I mean, you can do the same thing in QGIS, but the skill sets that we had within our team and we just looked at the different packages that are available to us, and we thought let's use ArcGIS Pro. It's just less buggy.
Yeah, definitely. Vara asked a question: how can we access real-time data?
I mean, that would be us working together to implement that geoprocessing workflow. So you'd read the APIs data, do the geoprocessing, and you do that, daily, I guess. And so the dashboard would continue to be updating, and so that would run in the background. I mean, you wouldn't be able to just link directly to the API because there's a lot of processing in between. But if you built a dashboard to read from a database that was constantly being updated through a geoprocessing workflow, then you could, in theory. But some of these data sets aren't available from an API, so that would get in the way of that sort of real time.
Yeah, definitely. There's another question from Mohammed. Would you please describe more about the vulnerability types in the sensitivity formula?
So the vulnerability, what was it? Vulnerability
types.
So the vulnerability types would be, for example, a particular habitat. Say we have this very common forest type in this part of the world called mixed species eucalypt forest. If you disturb that through soil disturbance, or if there's a spill, or if you disturb it, it very quickly bounces back. There's lots of seed in the ground. There's lots of capacity for that habitat to just reestablish itself over a fairly short period of time. In contrast to, for example, a wetland. So a wetland is another habitat which, if you do disturb it, the likelihood of that reestablishing itself and bouncing back is a lot lower, and so you need to invest a lot more in actually rehabilitating that site when compared to a mixed forest type. So that would be an example of the two contrasting vulnerabilities for a forest type, and you can apply the same concept to a species. Like some fish, you eradicate that fish from a particular patch, and then they come back the next year because they are moving around a lot and they reoccupy a site very quickly, whereas another fish species might be a lot more vulnerable in that if you remove it, it takes a long time for that to recolonize and come back.
Yeah, so hopefully that helps explain a little bit more context around the sensitivities. I know we're right on time. I might just package up 2 questions. That could be our last ones. One from Anita asking, besides the environmental team, can the dashboard be effectively used by a works management center or capital delivery team to respond to incidents, supposing the data is not live? And also Jared's asked, what sort of feedback is coming in from the current Southeast Water users? So I noticed that we've got, I think, sorry if I put you on the spot, Katrina Hall's on the call. Or Cody, yeah. So they're working at Southeast Water. They're part of the project management and delivery team. Maybe you could provide a little bit of insight into how people are currently using it. And
I'll see if Kat joins. If not, I'll jump in knowing on time. But I know it is quite noisy in the office right now around me. Feedback is really positive. So we've had some great engagement with it and some great uptake with it. I would say probably the best example was that in an incident recently, the operation teams were able to jump on, and they were the ones that could then assess that further downstream of a incident was higher sensitivity. So they knew they had to go and do further sampling downstream before they even engaged with the environmental specialist. So it's been really good kind of engagement, education, and uptake. Everybody's been, super positive about it. It's starting to kind of get in that BAU of when they know an incident's occurring, they need to go and be checking the new sensitivity map. So really positive feedback from us so far. And it's always, like, both teams have been great to work with in the ongoing work and making sure that the data is staying maintained. That we've spoken with a lot, like our ecologists, because I think the data sets that are the ones that are most needing update is the endangered species from Biodiversity Atlas. And I think we're quite okay that that's only being done about every 3 months, because DECA needs the time to actually input all those observations and stuff. That we still have so many different data sets and everything that we can use. Having a few months off and not having completely live data, we're very okay with.
Oh, that's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that feedback, Cody. It's really nice to hear that people are using the tool as business as usual, and it's not just the environmental team. People from all areas of the business are using it to help inform the decision making and how to act quickly when an incident does occur. That's awesome. I might just quickly share screens just to wrap up. I'm very conscious of time. But I'm happy to stay on for a couple of minutes afterwards as well, just to help answer any extra questions or comments, or just have a chat. But thank you everyone so much for joining today. If you wanted to catch up on anything that we touched on in the session, or any of our previous sessions as well, we will make it available on our blog and YouTube channel. We also have a couple more sessions in the works as well. If you did want to sign up, we'll see. What have we got upcoming? We've got, that's today's session, but if we have a look, I think next month we've got a session which is around going paperless in the waste industry. So from data collection kind of all the way through to Power BI. So that should be a really interesting one. We'll have another session. We haven't announced it just yet, but we'll have one in August from the Agile Analytics team, all about building a workflow for the management of environmental data on the Westgate Tunnel project. So that will be a really interesting one, having a look at end-to-end Power Apps, Azure, Power BI reporting. And then I think the session after that, we'll have Damien, Snell, and probably myself and Daniel presenting on a workflow for analyzing kind of dredging project data, including some really cool techniques in Power BI, like live tracking of vessels using direct query into the marine traffic API, including real-time photos from streaming webcams on the vessels into Power BI, and then some low-code ways of just entering data into Excel on SharePoint, but scheduling refreshes, so it's all up to date. So we do have a couple more sessions in the works, so just keep checking in with the group. If you did have an environmental data analytics story that you want to share, even if you're just a very beginner all the way through to something super detailed and complex, we would love to hear from you. So please get in touch with Christian. His email's down here, or just write a comment, or reach out to us on any of the social media platforms or in the group. We would love to have you presenting as well. So thank you so much, and massive thanks to Peter for presenting today. I know him and his team are extremely busy, especially this time of year, approaching end of financial year. So we really appreciate you taking the time out just to share the amazing work that you and your team have done in this study, and help inspire other people to kind of think innovatively on their projects and do similar things. So no, thank you so much.
Thank you for organizing, Alice and Christian. Yeah, it's a great forum.
Yeah, no worries at all. No, we had a little bit of a break for, I think it was almost 6 months. We moved cities and we got really kind of busy with different things, and we didn't want to start it until we had a pipeline of future presentations. So yeah, appreciate you being our first one back. I think we hit the ground with a bang today. So no, it was really good to have you.
Thank you.
I'll just stop the recording here.